My father worked the night shift at a diner off Route 9 for 11 years, and for most of my childhood I was ashamed of it. My name is Ethan. I'm 26 now, and I didn't understand my father. Not really, not the actual weight of what he carried, until I was old enough to look back at my own childhood and see it clearly for the first time. My dad, Walt, wasn't always a diner cook. Before I was born, he was an electrical engineer, 3 years into a promising career at a manufacturing firm 2 states away when my mother got sick. Multiple sclerosis, diagnosed when I was 2 years old, a disease that took her ability to walk unassisted within 4 years, and eventually, when I was 11, took her entirely. I don't remember most of what happened in those early years. I was too young to understand why my father suddenly stopped talking about the new project at work, at dinner, why we moved from the nice house with the big backyard into a smaller rental closer to the hospital, why my father, a man with an engineering degree, started coming home smelling like a diner grill instead of an office. What I understand now, piecing it together from relatives and old paperwork I found much later, is that my father made a series of decisions in those years that quietly cost him almost everything he'd built for himself, so that my mother could get the care she needed and I could have something resembling a normal childhood. He left his engineering job within a year of her diagnosis, not because he was fired, but because the job required frequent travel, and travel meant leaving my mother alone with a toddler during a period when her mobility was declining fast and unpredictably. He took the diner job specifically because it offered flexible night shifts, allowing him to be home during the day to manage her care and drop me off at school, while a rotating cast of home health aides, paid for with money that should have gone toward savings, toward a house, toward anything but medical bills, covered the hours he couldn't. I remember being embarrassed as a kid when other parents asked what my dad did for work. "He's a cook," I'd say, quickly, before anyone could ask a follow-up question, feeling a hot flush of shame I didn't fully understand at the time. My friend Marcus's dad was a dentist. My friend Praya's mom was a lawyer. My dad flipped eggs and worked the grill at a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and came home every morning around 7 a.m. Just as I was leaving for school, exhausted in a way I registered but never really questioned. I didn't know, at 10 years old, that he'd sold his late father's car, a vintage Mustang he'd spent years restoring as a young man, the one possession I now understand he genuinely loved, to cover 3 months of a specialized physical therapy program that our insurance wouldn't fully cover. I didn't know he'd quietly declined 2 separate job offers over those years, engineering positions that would have paid nearly triple his diner wages, because both required relocating to cities without the specific neurological specialists my mother's declining condition required. I didn't know any of this because he never told me. Not once, not even after my mother passed away when I was 11, not during the years afterward when it was just the 2 of us in that small rental house. Him working nights, me doing homework at the kitchen table under a light he left on for me before he left for his shift. Some mornings I'd wake up at 6:30 and find Dad asleep in the kitchen chair, still wearing his diner apron because he never made it to bed before it was time to take me to school. I used to just step around him quietly and pour my own cereal, annoyed that he hadn't set out my backpack the night before, like other kids' parents seemed to do. I didn't understand, until years later, what it meant that he chose those extra 20 minutes of sleep in a hard kitchen chair over the comfort of his own bed, just so he wouldn't miss the sound of my alarm. What I did know, even as a resentful, embarrassed kid who didn't yet understand what he was looking at, was that my father was always there. Every school event somehow, despite working nights. Every parent-teacher conference. Every single one of my little league games. Even the ones that started at 9 a.m. after he'd worked until 3. Sitting in the bleachers in his diner uniform because he hadn't had time to change, looking exhausted in a way I now understand went far deeper than a lack of sleep. I was 14 when I said the thing I still, 12 years later, wish I could take back. We were in the car, driving home from a school function, and I'd overheard another kid's father earlier that evening make some offhand comment about real careers, and something about it had lodged itself under my skin in the particularly cruel way things do at 14. I turned to my father in the passenger seat of our old, rattling sedan and said, with all the casual cruelty a teenager can summon without fully understanding its weight, "Don't you ever wish you'd done something with your life instead of just working at a diner?" He didn't yell. He didn't get angry. He just looked out through the windshield for a few seconds before answering, his hands steady on the wheel, his jaw tight in a way I'd rarely seen. That silence hurt more than shouting ever could have, and then he said something I didn't understand at the time, something I wouldn't fully understand for another 12 years. Someday you'll understand what I actually did with my life, Ethan. I hope when you do, you'll forgive yourself for asking that question. I didn't understand what he meant, not then. It would take a box of old paperwork, a conversation with my aunt at a family funeral, and my own father's declining health 12 years later before I finally did. The truth started coming out in pieces, the way most important truths do. Not in one dramatic reveal, but scattered across years, small enough at first that I almost missed what they were adding up to. The first piece came when I was 19, home from community college for winter break, going through some old boxes in our garage looking for Christmas decorations. I found a folder of paperwork I didn't recognize, job offer letters, 2 of them, both addressed to my father, both dated within the same 18-month window when I was around 6 years old. One was from an engineering firm in Colorado, offering a senior position at nearly 3 times what he was making at the diner. The other was from a company in Seattle, similar terms. Both had a handwritten note in the margins, in my father's handwriting, that simply said, in each case, declined. Too far from Dr. Osei. I didn't fully understand what that meant at 19. I asked my father about it that same evening, holding the folder out to him at the kitchen table. He looked at it for a long moment, then set it down carefully, like it was something fragile. Dr. Osei was your mother's neurologist, he said simply. One of maybe 4 specialists in the whole region who understood her specific condition well enough to actually manage her care properly. Those jobs would have meant starting over somewhere with no equivalent, during a period when her decline was moving fast enough that we couldn't afford the transition time. That's all that was. That's all that was. Like it was a simple, unremarkable fact, rather than the sound of a man quietly closing a door on a completely different life, twice, without ever mentioning it to anyone. The second piece came at my aunt's kitchen table, 3 years later, at my grandmother's funeral. My Aunt Denise, my mother's sister, not to be confused with anyone in this particular family, pulled me aside during the reception, a little emotional from the wine and the occasion, and told me things my father had apparently never intended for me to know. She told me about the Mustang, the vintage car my father had spent 4 years restoring in his 20s, the one thing, according to my aunt, that had genuinely been just his, separate from being a husband or a father. She told me he'd sold it, without hesitation, without complaint, the week after my mother's insurance denied coverage for a 12-week intensive physical therapy program that her doctors believed could meaningfully slow her disease's progression. The therapy had cost just under $9,000. The Mustang, fully restored, had been worth roughly that amount at the time. He never told your mother where the money actually came from, my aunt said, wiping her eyes. He told her he'd gotten a work bonus. She found out the truth almost a year later from me, actually, by accident. She cried for 2 days, not because she was upset, because she couldn't believe he'd give up something he loved that much without saying a word. The third piece, the one that finally made everything click into place completely, came just 8 months ago when my father, 61 now, his hands starting to shake slightly in a way that worried me more than either of us said out loud, sat me down and told me he'd been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease. We were at his kitchen table, the same one from my childhood when he told me, and in the quiet after that conversation, in a moment that felt strangely similar to the drive home 12 years earlier when I'd asked him that cruel question about his life, he finally, for the first time, told me the full story himself, without my aunt's help, without an old folder of paperwork, doing the talking for him. He told me about turning down both job offers. He told me, in his own words this time, about the Mustang. He told me about years of night shifts he requested specifically so he could be present during my daytime school events, sacrificing sleep in a way that had genuinely, measurably shortened how much actual rest he got across, more than a decade, because he refused to be the kind of father who missed the things that mattered. I never told you any of this, he said, because I didn't want you to grow up feeling like you owed me something for it. I wanted you to just have a normal childhood, as much as I could give you one, without the weight of knowing what it cost. I sat there 25 years old, finally understanding the full shape of what my father had actually built with his life. Not a career, not a reputation, not the kind of success I'd once, shamefully, measured him against as a teenager. He'd built something else entirely. He'd built me, and he'd done it by quietly, deliberately, without ever asking for credit, giving up nearly everything he might have had otherwise. I thought about that drive home when I was 14. Someday you'll understand what I actually did with my life. I finally did. And what I understood, sitting at that table with a father whose hands had started to shake with a disease that felt like a cruel echo of my mother's, was that I had exactly one chance left to give something back to a man who had never once asked me for anything. I want to be honest about something before I tell you what happened next. I don't think there's any way to fully repay a debt like the one my father built over 25 years. I don't think that's really the point of this story, or of what I eventually decided to do. But I did decide, sitting at that kitchen table, that I wasn't going to let his sacrifice be something he carried quietly and alone for the rest of his life, the way he had for all of mine. The first thing I did was research his diagnosis properly, not the vague, frightened version he'd given me at the table, but the actual medical details, the treatment options, the specialists in our region who dealt specifically with early-stage Parkinson's. I found, through an afternoon of calls I didn't tell him I was making, a neurologist 40 minutes away with a strong specialty in exactly his condition, and a physical therapy program specifically designed to help preserve motor function for as long as possible in early-stage cases. It cost money, not an overwhelming amount, but more than my father, still working part-time shifts at a different diner even in his 60s, could easily absorb without help. I was working as a mechanical engineer myself by then, a career I'd built. I understood now with a kind of humbled clarity, largely because my father had quietly modeled exactly the kind of steady, careful discipline the field required, even while working a job that had nothing to do with engineering at all. I had savings. I had, for the first time in my life, something real to offer him back. I didn't ask him if he wanted help paying for it. I'd learned, from watching him for 25 years, that asking sometimes gives people room to refuse out of pride. Instead, I simply set up the first appointment, told him about it as already scheduled, and told him I'd already handled the cost with the clinic directly. He argued briefly, the way I expected him to. "Ethan, you don't need to." "I know I don't need to," I said. "I want to. You spent 25 years making sure I never knew what things cost you. Let me spend however many years we have left making sure you don't have to carry this one alone." He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, and I watched something in his shoulders loosen slightly, not relief exactly, but something close to it, the specific release of a man who had spent decades being the only one carrying weight, finally allowing someone else to help hold it. The second thing I did, a few months later, once I'd saved enough on top of what I'd already committed to his treatment, was track down a 1968 Mustang Fastback, not the exact car he'd sold decades earlier, which I confirmed through some careful research had actually been sold twice more since and was now in a private collection I couldn't access, but the same model, same year, in a similar shade of deep forest green that my aunt had described from old photographs. It wasn't restored. I'd found it through a classic car forum, sitting in a barn in rural Ohio, in genuinely rough shape, needing what the seller estimated at several $1,000s in restoration work. I bought it anyway, had it shipped to a garage near my own apartment, and spent the following 8 months, most weekends, most evenings after work, learning to restore it myself, mostly through tutorials and a genuinely patient mechanic named Sal, who ran the shop and took a liking to the project, once I explained why I was doing it. I gave it to my father on his 62nd birthday, 7 months ago. I drove it to his house myself, parked it in his driveway, and told him to come outside for a minute. I don't think I've ever seen my father cry before that moment. Not at my mother's funeral, not at his own diagnosis, not through any of the quiet hardships I now understood he'd carried alone for most of his adult life. He stood in his driveway in his bathrobe, looking at that car, and his hands, already shaking slightly from the Parkinson's, pressed against his mouth as his shoulders started to shake for an entirely different reason. "You didn't have to do this," he said. The same thing he'd said about the neurologist. The same reflexive deflection of a man who genuinely didn't know how to receive the kind of care he'd spent a lifetime giving away, without asking anything in return. "I know," I said. "I wanted to. You gave up everything so I could have a normal life. This isn't close to even. It's just a start. My father's Parkinson's has continued progressing over the past several months, slower than it might have, according to his neurologist, thanks to the treatment program we started early, but progressing nonetheless. Some days are harder than others. He still drives the Mustang carefully on good days, usually with me in the passenger seat now instead of him driving me somewhere the way it always used to be. I think about that drive home when I was 14 more than I probably should, the cruelty of what I asked him, the years it took me to understand the answer he gave in return. Someday you'll understand what I actually did with my life. I understand now that my father's life wasn't measured by the engineering career he gave up, or the promotions he never chased, or the car he sold without complaint. It was measured by every night shift he worked so he could be present during the day, every home health aid he paid for instead of saving for himself, every quiet sacrifice he made and never once mentioned, because he genuinely believed love was supposed to be given without keeping score. I spent years being embarrassed by a father who worked at a diner. It took me 25 years to understand I was actually the son of a man who had quietly given up an entire different life, without complaint, without credit, simply because he decided, the day my mother got sick, that his son and his wife mattered more than anything he might have built for himself instead. He sacrificed everything for his son. The least I could do, once I finally understood that, was spend whatever years we have left making sure he knew hadn't been wasted on someone who failed to notice. These days, when we take the Mustang out on Sunday mornings, I usually drive. His hands shake too much now, but every time I glance over, I still catch him smiling at that dashboard. For years, he carried me. Now it's my turn to carry him.